On May 25, 1979, a DC-10 lifted off from Chicago O'Hare and its left engine tore clean off the wing. Registration N110A. Within seconds, the aircraft rolled, and everyone aboard was lost. For years, the instinct was to blame the engine. If an engine falls off, the engine must have failed. But the engine was fine. What broke was the pylon, the strut that hangs the engine under the wing. And the crack that finally let it go had been sitting in that pylon for weeks, put there not by wear, not by a design flaw, but by a maintenance procedure that was supposed to protect the airplane. Start with the part that failed. The pylon, sometimes called the strut, is the load-bearing bracket that bolts each engine to the wing. It carries the full weight of the engine and the full force of its thrust, and it's built to flex as the wing bends in flight. At the top of the pylon, an aft bulkhead ties the whole assembly into the wing structure. Along the upper edge of that bulkhead runs a flange, a lip of metal that anchors it in place. Remember that flange. It's the single most critical piece in this story. And every time an airline needs to swap an engine on a DC-10, that entire assembly has to come apart and go back together. McDonnell Douglas, the manufacturer, wrote a specific procedure for that engine change. First, remove the engine from the pylon. Then, as a completely separate job, remove the pylon from the wing. 2 operations, 2 teardowns, a lot of man-hours. American Airlines looked at that and saw time it could save, so its mechanics developed their own method. They would drop the engine and the pylon together as one single combined unit, using a forklift to hold the weight while the attachment bolts came out. One lift instead of 2 teardowns. It cut labor, and it cut the days an aircraft sat out of service. What American did not do was get McDonnell Douglas to concur. The NTSB later confirmed the manufacturer never signed off on the combined procedure. Here is why that choice mattered. Lowering a combined engine and pylon assembly on a forklift is a balancing act measured in fractions of an inch. The pylon has to clear its wing attachment points cleanly on the way out and on the way back in. Shift that load even slightly, and the thin upper flange on the aft bulkhead gets driven straight into the wing structure it's supposed to bolt to. There is almost no margin for error. The forklift has to hold thousands of pounds rock steady while a single operator reads the clearances by eye. The manufacturer's slower 2-step method existed for exactly this reason. Keeping the engine and pylon as separate jobs kept that fragile flange away from anything hard enough to break it. Now go back before the crash to American's maintenance facility in Tulsa, Oklahoma. On the night of March 29th into the 30th, 1979, this same aircraft, N110AA, was in the shop for an engine change using the forklift method. The engine and pylon were held in place on the lift. Then a shift change came around, one crew handing the job to the next. During that handover, the forklift lost a small amount of hydraulic pressure, not a dramatic drop, just enough that the load settled slightly, and that was all it took. The engine assembly pressed up against the wing, and the upper flange of the pylon's aft bulkhead fractured. The airplane was then reassembled and returned to service, carrying a cracked pylon that no one knew about. This is the cruel turn in the story. The flange that failed was structure that maintenance had its hands on that very night. The whole point of the work was to service the aircraft and hand it back sound. Instead, the procedure itself broke the one component holding the engine onto the wing, the part it was meant to be protecting, and the damage didn't announce itself. The DC-10 flew on, day after day, with a fracture already started in its left pylon. Over the following weeks, ordinary flight did the rest. Every takeoff, every landing, every gust, and every thrust cycle worked that fracture a little wider. The crack grew under loads the pylon was designed to shrug off, except it was no longer whole. Then came May 25th. As the DC-10 rotated for takeoff at O'Hare, the weakened flange gave way completely. The pylon and the engine wrenched up and over the leading edge, tearing away from the wing, and taking critical hydraulic and control lines with them. What began as a shortcut in a Tulsa hangar finished on a Chicago runway. After the accident, the FAA grounded the entire DC-10 fleet, and inspectors went hunting for the same damage across the country. What they found removed any doubt about the cause. 6 DC-10s were discovered with fractured or damaged upper flanges on the Pylon aft bulkhead. 4 of them belonged to American, 2 belonged to Continental. And every one of those 6 aircraft had been through the forklift method, with the engine and pylon removed as a single combined unit. Aircraft maintained the manufacturer's 2-step way did not show this cracking. The design had not failed across the fleet. The procedure had. The NTSB's final report, adopted in December 1979, said it plainly. Americans' combined engine and pylon procedure had never been adequately evaluated for its potential to damage the aircraft. Nobody had sat down and asked what happens if the forklift slips during a shift change. The savings in man-hours were carefully worked out. The risk of breaking the airframe was never worked out at all. That is the lesson American 191 burned into the industry. A maintenance method is part of an aircraft's safety system, and changing one is a change to the aircraft itself. It has to be proven before it ever touches a flying airplane. This crack didn't come out of the sky, and it didn't come from age. It came off the hangar floor, from a genuine effort to work smarter that skipped the one question that mattered.